specifically what we're talking about is children that either come across unaccompanied or are somehow separated from their immediate family, and they literally disappear, right? And some are exploited, some are trafficked.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey everybody, normally this would be our Motivation Manifestation Monday episode, but we are switching it up today and we are doing a special update on the border because there is a ton of shit happening right now. And there's been some recent revelations with an HHS whistleblower coming forward with some pretty insane information about the extent of child trafficking that's taking place by the Biden administration. And the fact that Title 42 is about to be lifted on May 11th, and there are already over 40,000 migrants waiting in Juarez, Mexico to cross over into El Paso, Texas. So there's a lot going on, and we are really excited to have two guests with us today to join the conversation. So first, we want to welcome back Tim Enlow. And if you did not hear our border episode back in January, Tim is a former federal agent who has firsthand experience at the U.S.-Mexico border, both with work on a drug task force operations back in the 80s, and more recently as an executive protection specialist for journalists who have been covering the shit show of our border crisis ever since Biden came into office. And if you didn't hear that episode, please go back and check it out, because the conversation with Tim was incredibly eye-opening for anyone who doesn't fully understand what's been happening on our border. So welcome back, Tim.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
Awesome. And we are also excited to announce an additional guest with us today. We have Dean Fittz, a former U.S. Customs and Immigration agent who spent over a decade doing enforcement on the U.S.-Mexico border. Dean was also a special agent with the Department of Homeland Security for many years, and he has extensive knowledge of the smuggling operations and human trafficking that's been taking place on the border. And he's also an independent journalist and border security specialist. He's had boots on the ground with everything that's going on. So welcome, Dean. We are truly excited to have you with us today as well.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So let's dive in. There is a lot to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I thought I would just kick it off because I want to get your thoughts on the whistleblower that talked to Congress last week. Tara Lee Rodas, and she's actually someone that we talked about on the podcast months ago when she went forward to Project Veritas and talked to them. And she was assigned with HHS at an emergency intake site in California. And she went into detail on how these migrant children are being trafficked in the U.S. due to the open border. So I wanted to find out from you guys, like, what's your take on this? And the whole time she was talking, it was pretty jaw-dropping, but I was just thinking in the back of my head, is this going to make a difference? Like, will anyone ever be held accountable, or is this going to be another situation where no one really listens? Because the stuff she was saying was pretty horrific.
Dean?
I think it's going to be another situation where they're just going to gloss over or just not pay attention to it. That's been their strategy all along, pay no attention to what's going on behind the curtain. And it's only going to get worse with the new asylum rules, the child trafficking rules.
Well, yeah. And just from when we talked to Tim last time, at the time we recorded that previous episode, there were 20,000 children missing of just what was being reported. And now, just a few months later, that number is up to 85,000. So I can't even imagine where it's going to go in May.
Right. Yeah. And, just to double tap on what Dean said, I agree with that. I think if we look at the experience, whether it's the border issue or any issue where we've had whistleblowers come in front of Congress, it's big news for a day, maybe two. There might be some cosmetic feel-good measures that are talked about that are rarely actually even followed through on or implemented. And, I think part of that is the nature of our political system, right? Because we have a country and a political system divided. And I think that these whistleblowers that come forward are always in some way insulated and protected by one side, and they're gone after by the other side that attack their credibility, right? Because that don't want those points that the whistleblowers are bringing forward made public, right? Or so I just think that I think it's important she came forward. I think we need 50, 60, 100 more officials from DHS, Border Patrol, Customs, et cetera, to come forward, because I think that, you know, having one or two whistleblowers up there is one thing, but we need to show that this is a systemic problem. And the only way that point really gets brought home to the public is if a multitude of people come forward. And that's really what we need.
What I'm hoping is, again, the issue with showing how many children are missing. That seems to be the one thing that unites people across party lines, is when it comes to children. We've noticed in doing this podcast that people, you know, the whole thing with the gender affirming surgery for children, that parents are speaking out about that. And when it comes to children, people are more apt to pay attention. And so I'm wondering if, obviously, if they're only admitting to this number of children being missing, what's the real number that are missing? Because, you know, the government's not giving us accurate information, and that's all that they're admitting to. But what's really going on, and how can we get people to understand the significance of really paying attention to this and using the fact that this is involving children, which people tend to be more concerned about?
Right. And just so the audience knows, right? So specifically what we're talking about is children that either come across unaccompanied or are somehow separated from their immediate family, and they literally disappear, right? And some are exploited, some are trafficked, some wind up in questionable foster home or sponsor home situations, right? And that's a whole nother issue that we have. We have this horrible number now of 85,000 admitted to missing children that have come across the border. But worse than that, we also have probably somewhere around 150 to 200,000 additional children that have been placed with various sponsor families. And many of these families, or I should say sponsor individuals, many of these people have not been properly vetted. And there is no significant follow-up done to whether or not these children are safe, whether or not these children are being cared for properly, or whether or not these children are exploited or sexually trafficked. There is simply no follow-up being done by the government in regards to that. And that obviously leaves a huge opportunity for predators out there that are intent on harming children.
Yeah, last month, the House Oversight Committee held a hearing covering this. And Robin Dunn Marcos, who's the director of ORR, couldn't answer even the most basic questions about how they handle these unaccompanied children. And the thing with the 85,000 is she wouldn't confirm it or deny it. She kept skirting around the issue, giving bullshit answers. And it made me so mad, because I'm like, only in the government can you completely not know even the basics of your job and keep your job, because she wouldn't answer anything. And all that they got out of her was that they try to make a phone call. But if the people don't pick up, I mean, what are they supposed to do? Like, that was her answer, a phone call. And then you have Tara Lee Rodas that was saying that there were instances where she would witness 20 to 30 children in one location with nothing but men that have not been vetted. So it's like, what do you think is happening to these children? I mean, come on, And then she would see, there was one instance where a guy pulls up and he says, "Hey, I need 3 boys to come work for my business." It's like, it's modern day slavery. And sex trafficking. And these are just the children. I mean, this isn't even talking about what happens to the adults that come over that can't pay their debt off. So it's just absolutely horrifying. And what's worse is none of these people seem to care. that are in charge. Like, this is their job to know the answers to these questions, and they could care less. And that was pretty apparent to me in the hearing.
All this was intentionally done by not necessarily Biden, but by his administration. I have a subsource who was in meetings at the highest levels and specifically said Susan Rice is the one who ordered the kids to be released. She specifically wanted them released due to the optics.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I mean, I personally took video in the McAllen airport, of these large groups of children. And many times, they would have like one chaperone for a group of 20 to 30 kids, right? And that chaperone, the one we saw, she was maybe 19 years old, 19, 20 years old, right? She has a stack of folders, right, for each child. And her job is literally to transport them from the Catholic Charities building in the Rio Grande Valley in McAllen to the airport, get them through security, put them on planes, and then send them off across the country, right? And this is what, and of course, so how could that official from OR, how could they have the information? She's not even lying. She really doesn't have the information because the system is so haphazardly set up and was set up so quickly, as Dean said, to relieve the bad optics that were being shown on the news of these children in the detention centers, right? The administration desperately wanted those images off the nightly news. And if that meant releasing all these kids and not worrying about where they ended up, then that was preferable to seeing those images of those kids in the detention center.
Yes. That's their preference, is for the kids to be trafficked and to work as slaves or sex slaves, as opposed to them being held in detention. I mean, what's more dangerous for the kids?
right.
And I mean, if you read the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal or, any large, even a mainstream media is covering to some extent where some of these children are ending up. And they're ending up like the boys you mentioned, a lot of them are ending up in slaughterhouses, 14, 15 years old, working 16 hours a day in a slaughterhouse, right? I mean, we passed laws against this kind of stuff in our country years ago, right? But but yet the narrative from the left is that, oh, we're doing we're helping these folks achieve the American dream. Really? 16 hours a day as a 14-year-old in a slaughterhouse? I bet you if you asked him, he'd probably say, yeah, this ain't the American dream I signed up for.
Right.
Yeah,
And they're saying it's 2/3 of the children are going into illegal work, full-time jobs in factories with hazardous conditions or worse.
Right.
And only 1/3 of them are ending up with like an actual family member that can care for them.
Yeah,
And this is only going to get worse.
right. Yeah,
On May 11th, with the new asylum rules, as soon as they lift Title 42, one of the caveats to the new asylum rule is that they are going to keep family units together, no matter how the family unit came in, either through the POE or between the POE. And as we've seen frequently, not all these family units are actually family units. These kids are being sold out, rented out, leased out to people to say, okay, this is my son, right? This is happening on the border all the time. And whenever they come in as a family unit, they get to come in and claim asylum. They get released into the community. And when they come back, if they ever come back, that kid is not going to be part of that. They're going to use these kids again and again and again.
I was trying to find this article and it's gone, as they usually are, but I have read multiple articles about these children that are being raped, and women and children that are being consistently raped. It was an article that was an investigation done, and I think this child had been raped by multiple people during trying to cross the border. And what about all of this? Where's the attention on all of these kids who are not just being sold into, trafficking and labor camps, but basically having their youth and their childhood taken away, being raped, going across the border?
Right. Yeah, I've always felt like it is simply you can sit there and talk about, oh, to whoever wants a better life for their child, and that's why they're sending them oftentimes by themselves, these young children, on a multi-thousand-mile journey to the US. But my argument is if they are consistently traumatized along that journey, what's left for that better life once they arrive here, right? How much of a better life are they actually going to be able to have? And that's always been my position on immigration as a whole. I support legal immigration, and I don't support illegal immigration for that very reason, is that it actually hurts the migrants. It hurts them. And I would challenge anyone to argue that with me. And all you have to do is sit there and talk or interview any of them that have made that journey, and they all have horrific stories to tell. Rare is it that I've spoken with a migrant on the border who said, man, smooth as butter, no issues, it was easy peasy, walked right in, and yeah, man, the journey itself was a piece of cake. That just doesn't happen. It's traumatizing. And you're right, the women get raped, the children often get raped. And there have been multiple, and Dean can attest to this, when these folks are intent on evading Border Patrol, time and time again, when the adults scatter, if that kid can't keep up, that kid is on its own, and Border Patrol finds them all the time in the deserts, sometimes alive, sometimes not, right? Same with crossing the river. How many of them have drowned crossing the river? This is not the idea that the Democrats are saying that we're anti-human or we're anti-humankind by opposing illegal immigration. It's the exact opposite. It's because I care for human beings that I don't want to see anyone subjected to that, right? And as Dean pointed out, as of this past Friday morning, Border Patrol had 20,000 migrants in custody, right? Almost twice their capacity, right, is they had in custody. And they anticipate that on May 12th, when the Title 42 is lifted, they're anticipating 10,000 crossings a day, daily, 10,000 crossings. Now, if we do the math, that's 3,650,000 illegals pouring in per year. It is unsustainable. It is unsustainable from a standpoint of trying to help them, to have facilities to process them, to have, housing and food and everything that these folks need when they arrive in this country. It is unsustainable. And this is why we have to push back on this narrative with the liberals that they are somehow doing them a service by encouraging them to cross that border. No, you're inviting them into exploitation, into slavery, and into physical harm.
Yeah, you guys probably know more about this than I do, but I read that El Paso is basically getting ready to declare another state of emergency, and they're going to use like the city's convention center and a couple of vacant schools as like temporary housing for this anticipated flood of migrants that are going to come over. And other than like putting together these giant processing tents, I guess, that they're building as well, and they're using video conferencing now to interview migrants because they can't keep up. And like, what are you guys seeing or know about this aside from these plans? Like, what's going to be done?
Well, there's only a little over 1,000 asylum officers in the country, period. So they can't cover everything. And you're going to have Border Patrol and CBP officers doing the processing, and they're only going to be able to do so much. They're going to be quickly overwhelmed, and we're going to be back to where we have been all along, which is just the system can't handle that many people.
Yeah. Every president, though, up until Biden, has said it's not sustainable. Like even Obama said that. So what I'm curious of is like, what's going on with this administration? Obviously, Joe Biden doesn't know what the hell's going on, but like, who's behind all of this? Is this administration, and I'm going to get into my conspiracy a little bit because I believe conspiracies are just proven true 6 months later, but are they tied up with sex trafficking, child trafficking? Like, what is the end goal here for bringing all these people into our country?
Well, what the end goal is, by one reason, has to do with elections. It has to do with the census coming up in 2030. Because the more people you have in a concentrated area, more elected officials you get, and the electoral college gets dispersed that way. So come 2030, if you have X number of millions of people who this administration let in, who are they going to vote for?
100%.
But weren't they finding that a lot of these people are actually have like conservative beliefs and values?
Sure, they do, but it's not necessarily about what they believe in and who they would necessarily vote for. I mean, the Cubans are known for that as well. Hispanic Americans are mostly, Catholic, and they have conservative values. But if you amass enough people, the migrants come in and they go to these big city centers, all right? Those centers are where you're going to have the highest concentrations of population, and that's where you're going to end up with, the Democrat running those cities, and they get more votes, they get more representatives, as they split up the House of Representatives based on the census. They split up the electoral college votes based on the census. You mass all these people together in these Democrat-held cities, that's where you're going to get more representation.
Yeah, and I agree with Dean 100% on that. And to answer your question, I think that, when you are basically funneled through a machine, which is what this whole immigration mess is, right? We talked about that last time. Even outside this country, in the South American, Central American countries, there is a pipeline that is established. And that pipeline from Central America and South America all the way up to our border, and from our border to the interior of our country, that entire pipeline, there's no conservatives running and helping and assisting with that pipeline. This is all a 100% Democrat-funded operation. And so while those folks, like you said, they might have some conservative values, but if the people who helped you get here, right, are all Democrats, and they tell you, see, if you vote for our machine, our system, then more people will benefit the way you have, right? And we'll be able to get more people in and more of your relatives and things like that. Of course, that's going to have an influence, right? That is 100% going to have an influence. We were down in McAllen, and there was an asylum hotel down there, paid for by the government. The government contracts out these hotels where they keep all these illegals that are waiting on asylum cases and things like that. And the entire hotel had been bought out by the government for these asylum folks. Well, guess what we saw outside that hotel? Re-election signs, okay, for a Democratic candidate that was running for office who was holding a meeting that night at that hotel. So this tells you right there, and I posted it. I posted a representative's name who attended that meeting, who went to that meeting, and so they are indoctrinated all along the pipeline, and as soon as they step foot in this country, they are indoctrinated. Sister Norman Pimentel from the Catholic Charities RGV is in bed with every Democrat politician in the Rio Grande Valley, and they 100% let these folks know that they are responsible for helping them get into this country. And I think Dean is right. I think come 2030, the lines are going to be fundamentally redrawn in this country. The demographics will have shifted in all the major cities. And I think that is exactly what the Democrats' goal is at this point.
Yeah, and speaking of this pipeline, I watched a video, and I don't remember the exact location, but it was showing this town in South America where everything kind of starts, or people come here that want to get into America. And the guy was going around with his camera and he was showing every nonprofit was there. You had the Clinton Foundation, UNICEF, like all of them were there. And he said it's a whole business. They all work together. They prepare these groups. They give the people condoms, knowing that they're going to be raped all along the journey. And they send them on their way. And like they are helping them get into the country long before they ever even hit Mexico. And it was just jaw-dropping. It's like we never hear about this stuff that's happening, and all these organizations that are supposed to be helping children, supposed to be, and they're putting them in these like horrific situations, knowing they're going to be brutalized if they even survive the trip. And it's like I just don't understand why people aren't waking up to this yet. Left or right, like no matter what your political beliefs are, no one wants to see a child get, murdered or raped or sold into slavery or any of these things that are happening and very apparent. So I just don't get it.
I think that's where, conservatives are dropping the ball, is that every time you hear of a reporter that so-called is accompanying some of these groups on their journey to document, the humanitarian aspect of their journey of making it into this country, 99% of the time, it's a left-leaning journalist, right? We need conservative journalists that travel to those countries and, just like you said, expose these organizations that are setting up the way stations, that are providing them assistance along every step of the way. Every group that I've seen come across that border has new clothes, has cell phones, has debit cards, or some kind of ability to have money on hand, right? And this is all from the way stations that are set up along the pipeline, like you said, all the way down to South America. It is a well-oiled pipeline that is moving these thousands of people through, and people are profiting along every step of the way. Dean, can you, I think we can talk about this. Can you talk about that detective up there? Was it Eagle Pass with the stash houses?
Yeah, there was a detective with the Eagle Pass Police Department who had set up like 5 stash houses and was getting money, of course, for stashing, for hiding the aliens there, and finally got caught, but not until they had already made millions from hiding the illegal aliens there.
This is a detective, a sworn officer in the Eagle Pass Police Department, who has got 5 stash houses. And that's the other thing that people don't understand. When we talk about the cartels in Mexico when it comes to drugs, right? Drugs are just one aspect of the cartel's business. Human smuggling right now is a very profitable business for these cartels. And it's so profitable that the corruption is affecting us inside our country. So people want to talk about, oh, Mexico is so corrupt. We are corrupt. We are being corrupted because these are billions of dollars that are at stake for smuggling these human beings. And that money buys judges, it buys police officers, it buys political influence. And, this is another thing that is not being talked about enough.
One of their strategies is you can only sell a drug one time. How many times can you sell a human being?
That's exactly right. That's a good point.
Yeah, that's terrible, but it's true. Well, I know last week when they had that whistleblower come forward, Susan Rice, who's the domestic policy advisor, left her role and responded to the Times report that her team was shown evidence of growing migrant child labor crisis. So that gave me like a little bit of hope. I'm like, is it getting to the point where maybe they can't keep denying it? Did she leave because she knows that like shit's hitting the fan? I don't know. What's your take on that?
I think personally, no, it's like we talked about, it's going to get worse. I think that she knows it's going to get worse. She knows when Title 42 is lifted, it's going to get worse. I think her leaving had much more to do with that and not wanting to take on that chaos that is about to come from that again. And let's keep in mind too, we're rolling into another national election year, 2024, right? it is in their interests to sit there and put a lid on this, right? Biden is not going to want to stand up there. Not that he's going to debate anyone, but he is not going to want to sit there and talk about the migrant problem every day while he's trying to run for office. He's not going to want to do that. So they have even more incentive to try to put the lid on this, to try to minimize it, and to try to hide what's really going on. And I think that's what we're getting ready to roll into, a full-blown cover-up campaign once again to make it through the election year and sit there and minimize how bad things are at the border. I personally don't think it's going to work. Dean and I talked the other day with that law enforcement official. The amount of people being killed right now in car chases down on the border is astronomical. That's another thing people aren't seeing, right? Because it's not being covered by the national news. Every single day, DPS or local law enforcement is getting into car chases with these smugglers. And very often those smugglers wind up wrecking those vehicles either into innocent civilians driving down the road or just into single vehicle collisions, and where the migrants are ejected and killed. Life flight has to come in. The hospital system down at the border right now is constantly having to send out life flight to these accident scenes, right, from these car chases. And one of the things that came out when we were talking with that appointed official is that a lot of the cases that are coming through the court system are American teenagers who are recruited on TikTok to sit there and go down to the border to become drivers for a few $100s or a few $1,000s and smuggle these migrants. And then they run from the police and they're either hurt, killed, or they're facing now charges for being involved in fatal accidents where people died.
I wrote
And
about
you
that.
might have more information on that.
Yeah, I wrote about it. There was a case in particular that happened while I was down in Del Rio just several months ago. And the girl, she's like 19 years old, recruited her friend from high school, and they drove down to the Del Rio area, picked up several illegal aliens, and were driving them back, and got discovered and attempted to stop and fled through the city. I mean, high-speed chase, and T-boned a Jeep and killed her best friend or her friend, and killed a couple others in the vehicle and a couple of the aliens. And that was just a few months ago. And it happens all the time, every single day. And so much that that's one of the reasons that was cited in the Uvalde shooting. And that one of the reasons that they didn't react strongly to the alerts about, high-speed chase going on is because it happens so much through Uvalde. It happens all the time. And they were like, okay, it's just another day, another high-speed chase. We're here in the classroom. We don't need to worry about it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you guys, I feel like one of the things that the left is really good at that I don't think the right is good at is they're great at organizing and getting all their people together to try to make change. But what can we do? Like, anyone that's listening, because that's where I'm at. I'm like, what can I do other than just vote? Like, is there anything we can even do to try to stop this or change this? I mean, we're speaking out about it, but I just feel like helpless when it comes to anything that's actually going to help these people and especially these kids that are coming in.
You writing to your representative, state and federal, is at least something to continue to get it in the forefront of their minds. These are important issues that are affecting us on more levels than what's being reported on, and we need you to do something about it. Listen to us and start acting on it. State representatives can push. Federal representatives that you know of, they can definitely.
I think that, I agree with Dean, contacting your representatives. I think the other thing is this. So about 3 weeks ago or so, I had a protective detail for a Republican mega donor who wanted to go to the Capitol, right? He was was instrumental in pushing some legislation. In this case, it was against the drag queen story times that were being held at the public libraries. So he was pushing a bill, right, to sit there and take away funding, any library that holds these drag queen story times, that they would lose state funding for that library, right? And so, as part of my detail, I had to accompany this gentleman throughout the Capitol that day, and he marched to every conservative congressman and senator, Texas senator's office, and let it be known, as a mega donor and who was responsible for helping a lot of them with their campaigns as far as making financial contributions and stuff, how he expected them to vote. Right. And why it was important that they voted that way. And it wasn't just about the money, but it was also about because it's the right thing to do. Right. And everywhere this man went, those congressmen and senators, when they saw him, they stopped what they were doing and came over and shook his hand and, wanted to be on his good side and everything else. And he sat in every hearing and was heavily involved, and he even testified at the hearing. So when you ask what we can do, we need to find those people, and we need to get them involved on the border issue as passionately as they are involved in, whether it's this, some of the gay activist legislation that are trying to pass with the drag queens and stuff like that. Well, if we can mobilize against things like that because we're concerned about our children, then we ought to be able to mobilize the same way for issues that pertain to the border. And that's what we need, right? We need that kind of activism. This morning I just watched hundreds of protesters in the Florida Capitol, right? Gay protesters railing against Governor Ron DeSantis. And they had literally marched into the Capitol. We're in the center of the rotunda, and sitting there, several hundred of them chanting, yo, DeSantis got to go, or whatever they were chanting, right? They're all wearing the same shirts, and they're making noise, and they're being seen, and they're being heard, right? And they're being heard by representatives that they have helped elect by voting for them, who are pushing their agenda. Well, we don't see conservatives doing that. There's not hundreds of conservatives in the Capitol in Texas right now demanding that action be taken on the border. Why not?
Yeah, because you end up in jail for 2 years for doing it. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
really, like.
No, and I made that point on Facebook this morning. I said, so taking over a state capital, okay. Taking over the U.S. Capitol, not so much, right? You go into federal prison.
Yeah, but I bet any money if conservatives went into a state capital, they would be arrested. Like, the left gets away with it, the right doesn't. I mean,
but there's a way to do it, right? And like I said, there's a way that we can, we can organize and do it in a peaceful way, and go in there and not necessarily have chants and beating drums and things like that, but actually visiting these congressmen's office, these senators' offices. And you have the right to do that as a citizen in this country. You have a right to contact your congressman. You have a right to speak to them. Sit in on any hearings, that pertain to the border issue, and let people know that there are eyes that are watching how these folks are voting in the state of Texas. And that is critical if we're going to see movement on the border issue, because it's not going to come from the federal government. It's a pipe dream to think that we're going to get any assistance or any help from the federal government, at least not as long as there is a Democrat administration in office. They are actively encouraging it. So until that changes, we can't count on federal help. It's got to come from the states, right? So the borders that are along the state, and really, it's not just the border states. Everyone, the mayor of New York, Adams, is now saying we can't do this anymore. We cannot handle the amount of migrants that are coming to New York City. Now, this is New York City, right? Well, if New York City can't handle it, how does, podunk middle America, how do they handle it? Right.
Yeah.
Wait, Tim, you know what's funny about this? I literally just read an article that was talking about how, when asked where they want to go, a majority of migrants say they want to go to New York and Chicago, and that Adam's reaction to that was just like he basically lost his shit that we can't take any more migrants here.
Yeah, he said, we're done. Like, we're done. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the facilities. We don't have the money. We are done. We just can't handle it anymore. Well, guess what? You guys should have thought about that a long time ago, right? And now the chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak.
And you're fleeing the violence in your home country to go to Chicago,
Right.
go to New York.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Like a war zone.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And we talked about that a little bit last time, right? With that migrant mother that I met down in McAllen, that, you know, when I asked her where she was going, she said, and she was a single mother, right? And she said Baltimore. And I said, why Baltimore? And she said, I don't know where else to go. Like, somebody just told me go to Baltimore. And I'm thinking, this woman with a child is going to get off the bus in Baltimore, right? And walk by all these zombies that are in the half lean from being on fentanyl and everything else. And this is the American dream. This is what, you know, no, it's not. And she's going to be exploited. She will 100% be exploited the minute she steps off that bus, right? Because she knows no one there. She has no family there. And she's in a strange city, doesn't speak English. How in the world is she not going to be exploited, right? And so again, it's critical that people get together and contact your state legislatures, let them know that we need to secure the border. We need Title 42 to remain in place or to be put back into place. And whatever it takes, we're going to have to do it, because we're literally, it's an invasion now of humanity that our country simply can't handle. And we touched on this a little bit last time, right? About resources in this country, whether it's the power grid, the water system. Look in the West right now, the water issues they were having from the drought, right? And what, we're going to continue to pump in 3.5, 4 million illegals every single year to add to that. Our infrastructure can't handle what we currently have. Our power grid is hanging on by a thread, right? So this idea that we can manage to do this even to 2030. I shudder to think what our country will look like in 2030 if we don't stem this flow right now.
We've got to stop more deterrence, because right now all they're doing is facilitating. They're inviting them basically to come in. There needs to be deterrent measures, and they even proved it in this latest rule, the changes they're doing to the asylum law. They said, okay, we tried with the Venezuelans, and we said, okay, we're going to deport all of you that come across right away, immediate deportation. And guess what? The numbers dropped of Venezuelans coming in, because what? They deterred it. But they're not doing that across the board at all. They're facilitating, they're inviting these people to come in. Until we start deterring people and showing that there are consequences for entering illegally into the country, we're not going to be able to stop.
That was going to be my question. Is there any legislation that's being drafted or anything right now by Republicans or anybody that's trying to counteract the, Title 42 being lifted?
There's legislation that the representatives have passed and that they're ginning up now, but where's it going to go? It's not going to get, even if it can get through the Senate, it's not a veto-proof bill. But I at least applaud the House of Representatives for trying, because we've been saying all along, look, you got to at least try to do something. You got to try and show us you have our interest at heart here, that you're going to do something to deter all the illegals coming in. And they're trying. It may not go anywhere, but they are.
What happened with maybe I misread this, but I recall a couple months ago, Abbott was working on the border wall again. Did that fall by the wayside, or what's going on with that?
I think that got shut down. He was told to stop, and he did.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen any movement on the border wall at all. It's funny. I'm just reading here. This is in the Washington Post, and I found this interesting. A Government Accountability Office report last year criticized border officials for failing to coordinate migrant releases with U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement after lines stretching for hours or days formed outside ICE processing centers. The agency's New York office is so backlogged that migrants have been issued appointments into the year 2033.
Oh my
This
God.
is in the,
What
this
a
is in the
shock.
Washington Post. This is in the Washington Post, right? So this is what we're dealing with. Appointments in 20, and I'm sure that migrant, when that little notice arrives, 6 months before their court date in 2033, they're going to be like, that's right. I do have a court date here 15 years later, and I absolutely need to make that court date, right? But really that is the insanity that we're dealing with right now, right? And if we don't wake up as a country and really get serious about this and make this a priority, as far as politicians that are running for office, they need to sit there and show the American people that they intend to do something about this, or they shouldn't get our vote. It's really that simple. And with the national election coming up, I think it's going to be more important than ever to make noise, to be heard, to be seen, and to push this issue to the forefront.
I can't wait to see what Kamala Harris is going to say in the debates, because this is going to come up. And what is she going to say? Like, she's been completely
They're not debating.
absent.
Yeah,
They're not
exactly.
debating.
There's no debate. You're
There's
exactly
no
right.
debates. He's already
They've already said they're not going to have it.
There's not going to be any debates.
Doesn't look like it.
So I
He's
said
gonna
he's
be
the
his
he's
base.
the nominee. Period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wow. Okay.
I did want
And
to
that's, yeah.
I did
It's,
want to ask you guys
go ahead.
though, because you both have, like information with guys who are actually working the border patrol right now. I've got to imagine morale is absolute shit. And how are these border agents dealing with this? And I mean, I just can't imagine doing that job. As a cop, it was hard enough for me doing a job in a city that, didn't really give a shit about me doing my job. But this is like a whole different level.
Dean, I
These
think you can
guys,
comment on that. Yeah.
these guys don't get like, I talked to one of them. He's a vice president of the Border Patrol Council. So he's allowed to speak publicly about the issues. And he told me that they don't get to actually patrol anymore. I mean, they get to patrol maybe 1, maybe 2 days a week, because the rest of the time they are in processing. That's where they're spending their time. And they are depressed. They didn't join Border Patrol in order to sit back on their laurels and do nothing and process aliens and watch the flood come in. They wanted to do it differently, and they're not being allowed to.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a good point, Dean. We should actually see if we can't get that Border Patrol Council person. Maybe they'd be willing to come on the podcast next time. I think it would be a great thing to hear their view on this, because they could speak much more intelligently about the current state of morale and things like that. I know when I was down there last time, the officials who were willing to talk with me, they were frustrated. They were beyond frustrated. And, they have now been made part of a pipeline, like as Dean said, to assist the illegals rather than stop and secure the border, right? And so that's obviously a fundamental shift. It would be like if police officers, to get to your point, Stephanie, it would be like if police officers were now told, well, you're actually going to have to help the bank robber rob the bank. Okay, like you're going to have to assist them, because that's the only way it can be done safely. Because if you don't assist them, things could go bad, right? So we're gonna tell our police officer to assist the bank robber, right? That's the insanity that currently is with Border Patrol and what they're being asked to do down there, And I think that it's a huge problem. I think what we're going to start seeing down there as well is what we're seeing in police departments. Recruiting issues are probably going to develop. And then we are in a catch-22 where less agents are willing to join, putting more stress on the agents that are already there. Then more of them retire early or quit. And, and it just continues to get worse. So they need our help. They can't do it by themselves, right? And we have to, as citizens, get involved.
And Dean, you write a blog, correct?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that.
It's called Quest for Perspective, and I publish there and on Substack and a couple other places. But my writings generally are about the border issues and how it affects, what's not being reported. What about, like, Kate Steinle's killer finally got convicted of murder in federal court, or at least it's on the record of it. The border, the chases that happen every day, the recruitment, FBI sources using TikTok to recruit drivers, that's happening. A lot of different things that are just generally not known out there. I have access to officials with it that are still in government, and I get the information about what's happening behind the scenes. And it's been good. I've been enjoying doing the writing and doing the investigative reporting. And I guess it's frustrating to see that nothing really happens.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that maybe this podcast and other podcasts, we could start getting the word out and start getting people to start paying attention and start contact their representatives and say something needs to be done about this.
Are you guys aren't on TikTok, are you?
No.
Yep.
Yeah. So I know everyone hates TikTok. TikTok is the only place that I see this information like you were just talking about. You don't get it on Facebook or Instagram. It gets censored everywhere. There's a whole group of people on TikTok that are coming together to really get the truth out, and it's spreading like wildfire. So I know everyone wants to ban TikTok, but there's also a huge group of people on there that just want to fix these issues and bring light to them. And they're getting a hell of a lot more traction than they are on any other medium out there. So
I never thought that I would say this because I was never into TikTok, but we get our biggest support from TikTok, and that just blew my mind.
That's a good thing. Yeah. And look, at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer in using what works. Right. So if there's less censorship on TikTok and that works to a group's advantage to get the truth out, I'm all about it. Right. I am leery, obviously, for the same reasons that everybody knows about with TikTok, as far as who's behind it and all that good stuff and whether they're gathering information. But show me a social media platform these days that isn't gathering information on us, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. It's my phone that I carry in my pocket everywhere I go. That thing is gathering information, and
Exactly.
I even think about that. I need a new shirt, and next thing I know, I've got shirt ads popping up left and right on my phone, right? So that's what we live with these days, and there's a trade-off. Yeah, you can drop off the grid and bury your head in the sand and say, I don't want anything to do with any of this. Or we accept the bad that comes with technology, but use it to our advantage, right? To get the truth out, to mobilize, to organize, because as we talked about earlier, that's what the left is doing. And they're great at it. They really are. And, the old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, still true today. It's still true today, right? So we've got to be that squeaky wheel in our politicians' ears constantly. And these days, again, with technology, there's no excuse. It takes 5 minutes for people to Google who their representatives are and get an email address and fire off an email to them. 5 minutes of your time. And if everybody did that, if millions did that in their state, guess what? Those little secretaries and interns and helpers that are working in those congressional offices, they're going to be like, sir, ma'am, we got 5,000 emails last night about people that are furious about the border. Oh, okay. I better look at how I'm voting on this next upcoming border bill, right?
Or how you're voting on the Texas state law that's this Democrat is trying to push forward to give all the illegals Texas driver's licenses.
Right.
Wow.
And I just watched a hearing, a congressional hearing. When was it? I just saw a clip from it a few days ago, where they asked them, well, once those illegals are giving MTAs, motion to appears, right? They ask the official, do they then technically qualify for benefits? And because they have a motion to appear. And the answer was yes, up to $800 in benefits, and some of them get a cell phone. And again, do the numbers. If we're talking about 3.5 million illegals coming across next year alone after Title 42 is lifted, times $800, right? 800 times 3.5 million, okay? And again, you see the financial impact. And that's just on that one thing. That's just on the benefits. That's not talking about the healthcare system. It's not talking about all the other things that we discussed here today.
What's another few trillion to Biden? I mean,
Right.
that's his job, right? He just spends our money.
Print
But
more money.
I want to point this out too, and Stephanie and I have talked about this several times. Like people who think that the border problem is just, a Texas problem or an Arizona problem. It's not. It's a United States problem. These people are not all staying in Texas or Arizona or California. They are going throughout the entire country. So if you think that you can just ignore this issue because it doesn't impact you, it does. And
Yeah,
it
let's
will.
be clear about this, and I think Dean will agree. The majority are not staying in the border states. The majority are going to the interior of the country.
Correct. They're going to the Baltimores, the Chicagos, they're going to Denver. They're going to all the small towns as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming on the podcast. And I know that once Title 42 is lifted and we start to see the influx of what's happening, we'd love to have you guys back on again and do another update soon.
Yeah, Dean and I have actually been talking a little bit. I'm hoping here within the next month and a half, I'm hoping to organize another trip down to the border and get some firsthand footage and show people exactly what's going on down there, and maybe Dean can go as well. And I think it would be a good thing trying to actually interview some of the Border Patrol officials that are willing to talk to us and things like that. And again, the more we get the word out, the better off our country is going to be.
Yeah. Well, thanks for helping us do that by coming on the podcast. And I think it will make a difference. I think we've just got to keep talking about it and putting it out there and waking people up to it. So we appreciate you guys coming on, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here for our Weird Wednesday episode. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you get our latest episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you could, please rate and review the show. We are going to be reading every single review, and I would love it if you hopped over to Instagram at Unapologetically Outspoken and say hi. We want to see who's out there and start a conversation, plus get all of the topics that you want us to talk about next. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.